Imagine a time when people from Venezuela flew to Miami every weekend just to go shopping. Their country was flush with oil money, a global powerhouse. Now imagine that same country just a few decades later, where families fight for scraps and power goes out for days. These two worlds existed in the same place. How did paradise become a desperate struggle? That's the question at the heart of Venezuela's story. How does a country go from so rich to so poor so fast?
Venezuela is in deep trouble tonight. Once blessed with the riches of its oil, the socialist nation is now on the brink of economic collapse.
En Estados Unidos ha crecido mucho la pobreza, mucho ha crecido la pobreza. Y es ahí donde ustedes deben preguntarse, bueno, ¿y qué hace el gobierno de Estados Unidos gastando miles de millones de dólares en Irak?
And what makes this collapse so shocking is one simple fact. Venezuela has more proven oil reserves than any other country on the entire planet. We're talking more oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Canada. It's sitting on over 300 billion barrels of the stuff. That wealth is why, back in the 1950s, Venezuela was the fourth richest nation in the world. But today, that same country is defined by poverty and hunger. Other places like Dubai or Qatar used their oil money to build modern empires. So why did Venezuela's oil wealth seem to lead to ruin? This wasn't just bad luck. It's a story about how relying on one single thing, combined with terrible political choices and outside pressure, can destroy a nation from the inside out. It all kicked off in 1922, when a single oil well blew out, gushing black gold for 9 straight days. This wasn't just a discovery, it was like striking the world's biggest lottery ticket. Soon after, Venezuela struck a deal with the big American oil companies. The agreement was simple, a 50-50 split on all the profits. And with that handshake, the floodgates opened.
Bear in mind that well into the 20th century, Venezuela was still a very undeveloped country, almost feudal. Practically the only exports Venezuela had were coffee and cocoa. The arrival of oil became an extremely important source of income and foreign currency for the country.
Money poured into the country like never before. We're talking about a fire hose of cash that lasted for decades, completely transforming the nation. Venezuela got a brand new modern face with big highways, towering buildings, and a booming middle class. The wealth was so insane that it became normal for rich Venezuelans to do something that sounds almost made up today. They'd casually fly to Miami for the weekend just to go shopping. Think about that. Hopping on a plane to another country was their version of a trip to the mall. On the surface, it looked like a perfect system, a paradise built on oil. But there was a massive, dangerous flaw right at the center of it all. The entire country was running on a single engine. When times were good and oil prices were high, everything worked. The government had money for social programs, businesses were thriving, and people had jobs. But what happens when your entire economy, your government's budget, and your people's future all depend on the price of one single thing? You're not building a country on solid rock. You're building it on top of a volcano. And this volcano of oil had two problems. First, its price could crash at any moment.
Oil prices dropped 10% on Friday after a plan by major producers to limit output collapsed. The proposal aimed to keep oil prices at a steady amount, anticipating the drop on demand due to COVID-19, slowing down manufacturing and travel globally.
And second, the supply of money it generated was so addictive that it completely warped the country's politics, creating a system that was strong when oil was expensive, but incredibly fragile when it wasn't. This was a paradise with a ticking clock, and the first signs of trouble were already on the horizon. That fragile system was about to be pushed to its breaking point. When Hugo Chávez came to power, he had a simple, powerful promise. He sold himself as a modern-day Robin Hood. He would take the country's massive oil wealth away from big foreign companies and give it back to the poor. And at first, it looked like a brilliant success.
Aquí mismo, está la reserva de petróleo más grande de este planeta. Aquí en Venezuela tenemos petróleo para más de 100 años. A Estados Unidos se le está acabando el petróleo. La razón de mayor peso de que Estados Unidos quiera poner aquí un gobierno subordinado a él, al imperio, como lo tuvieron durante mucho tiempo, es el petróleo venezolano.
After 1999, global oil prices skyrocketed. The amount of money Venezuela made from selling oil more than doubled, jumping from $14 billion a year to a staggering $34 billion by 2004. With all that cash, the government started huge social programs and the poverty rate began to drop. But this was an illusion. Instead of using those billions to build new industries or fix roads and power plants, Chávez poured the money into one thing: making everything cheap. He opened up government-run shops where you could buy food and goods for 50 to 70% less than their actual cost. Think about that. How can a local farmer or a small factory owner compete with a government that's practically giving things away for free? They couldn't. So they just stopped. Venezuela's own farms and factories began to shut down, one by one. The country that should have been self-sufficient was now buying almost everything it needed from other countries, all paid for with oil money. But the most devastating move was aimed directly at the oil industry itself. In a push to get total control, Chávez fired 18,000 people from the state oil company. These weren't just random workers. They were the experts, the experienced engineers, the geologists, the managers who actually knew how to get the oil out of the ground. And he replaced them with people who were politically loyal but had no idea what they were doing. Suddenly, the people in charge of the most complex oil operations in the country didn't have the skills for the job. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Refineries started to fail. Equipment broke down and wasn't fixed. Oil production, the one thing keeping the entire country afloat, began to collapse. The nation's greatest source of wealth was now its biggest problem, and it was being run into the ground. With the country's oil production already in a free fall, the situation was incredibly fragile, and that's when the outside world decided to step in. Starting in 2017, the United States hit Venezuela with a series of crippling economic sanctions. The idea was to put pressure on the government, but the effect was like cutting off the country's oxygen supply. Think about what that actually means. These weren't just small penalties. The sanctions made it almost impossible for Venezuela to sell its oil on the global market. And since oil was the only thing bringing money into the country, the government's income basically vanished overnight. But it gets worse. The sanctions also cut Venezuela off from the international banking system. This meant they couldn't easily buy things they desperately needed from other countries. Remember all that broken down oil equipment? The failing refineries? Now they couldn't even buy the spare parts to fix them. The country's most important industry was falling apart, and the sanctions essentially took away their toolbox. This is where things get really complicated. The official line from the US was that these sanctions were targeting a corrupt government to help the Venezuelan people. But many argue they did the exact opposite. By cutting off the country's money, the sanctions made it even harder to import food and medicine, making life for ordinary people a nightmare. It created a trap with no escape. The internal political choices had already driven the car off the road. But the sanctions were like someone coming along and setting the car on fire. It took a country that was already in a deep, self-inflicted crisis and pushed it into a complete humanitarian catastrophe. Venezuela wasn't just failing anymore. It was being actively isolated. We've seen how Venezuela went from a vibrant powerhouse, where people even flew to Miami just for a weekend shopping trip, to a country now struggling just to feed its families. It started with all that oil, a huge blessing that became a curse when the nation relied on it for everything. Then came the terrible political choices. Imagine firing 18,000 skilled oil workers overnight, replacing them with people who had no idea how to get the oil out of the ground. That was a huge mistake that wrecked the country's main industry. Finally, the world stepped in. Sanctions delivered the knockout punch, making it impossible for Venezuela to sell its oil or buy the basic things it desperately needed. The contrast is sharp. A nation sitting on the world's biggest oil reserves is now desperately poor. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly even a paradise can be lost. This story leaves us with crucial lessons about power, wealth, and the true cost of bad decisions. If you want to keep exploring these deep dives into what shapes our world, and make sure you don't miss the next story we uncover, then hit that subscribe button.